Why does your prostate keep growing even as your own testosterone quietly falls year after year? If less fuel is supposed to mean less growth, why does the pressure and the swelling keep showing up anyway, right on schedule, like clockwork nobody can explain? That exact question sat with me, unanswered for years, until my doctor finally drew it out for me on a scrap of paper in his office, and I actually understood it for the first time. I'm 83 now. These days I get up once most nights, sometimes not at all, and I genuinely forget my prostate exists for days at a stretch, which after years of planning every car ride around the nearest bathroom is not a small thing to say out loud. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because for years I assumed the swelling and the pressure were just something you accepted, like gray hair, and I never once asked what was actually driving it. For years I lived with the pressure, the constant low-grade urge, the feeling of never quite finishing when I went. I didn't think of it as a medical mystery, I thought of it as just being old. My father had it, his father probably had it, and I figured it was simply a tax the body collects on men once they cross a certain age, something you grit your teeth through rather than something with an actual mechanism behind it. There's a particular kind of quiet defeat in accepting something you don't understand. I'd sit in restaurants and immediately clock where the bathroom was before I even looked at the menu, an old habit I performed so automatically I stopped noticing I was doing it. I turned down a fishing trip with my brother 2 summers running, telling him I was busy, when the truth was I didn't trust my own body on a boat with no bathroom for 6 hours. I never said that part out loud to him. Men my age don't, mostly. We just quietly narrow our own lives and call it getting older, and nobody around us ever knows the real reason behind the excuses. What I never asked, not once in decades of appointments, was why the gland kept growing at all when the hormone everyone associates with a man's prime years was steadily declining. It seemed backward. Less fuel, more growth. I brought that exact confusion to my doctor 2 years ago, half expecting him to wave it off the way doctors sometimes do when an appointment is already running short. He didn't wave it off. He told me testosterone itself isn't really the driver of prostate growth, the way most men assume. Inside the gland, an enzyme converts a portion of that testosterone into a different, much more potent hormone called DHT, and it's DHT, not testosterone directly, that signals prostate tissue to keep growing. Even as overall testosterone drops with age, the conversion process can keep humming along locally inside the gland, which is exactly why the swelling doesn't slow down just because a man feels less vigorous than he used to. He explained that prostate tissue actually concentrates DHT at levels far higher than what circulates in the bloodstream, which is part of why the gland responds so strongly to a hormone that, by the numbers, represents a small fraction of a man's total hormonal picture. It's a local, concentrated effect, playing out quietly inside one small gland, mostly invisible until the pressure and the bathroom trips make it impossible to ignore any longer. He drew it out for me, almost like a small factory diagram right there on his prescription pad. Testosterone coming in from the bloodstream, an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase sitting inside the gland like a machine on a floor, converting a portion of it into DHT on the spot, locally, without ever needing the rest of the body's testosterone levels to change at all. That was the piece that finally made sense of something that had confused me for years. Why my energy, my mood, my general vigor had all declined the way you'd expect with age, while the one thing I actually wanted to shrink kept quietly growing regardless. 2 completely different signals, he said, running on 2 different clocks, and nobody had ever separated them for me before that afternoon. I asked him the obvious next question. If that conversion enzyme is doing the damage, is there anything that interferes with it naturally, something short of the prescription that had been sitting unfilled in my medicine cabinet for months because I was nervous about the side effects everyone online seemed to describe? He told me there was research pointing toward a mineral that acts as a natural inhibitor of that very enzyme, present in ordinary food, nothing exotic or expensive. For years, one number ran my life, the PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer, it measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they pushed to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. The mineral is zinc, and the everyday sources are things like pumpkin seeds and cashews. My doctor explained that zinc appears to work as a natural inhibitor of the enzyme responsible for converting testosterone into DHT inside the gland, and that prostate tissue itself concentrates zinc at a far higher level than what's found in the bloodstream, almost as if the gland is built to depend on it. Research has documented that connection between adequate zinc levels and healthier enzyme activity in prostate tissue, which is precisely the mechanism I'd been missing for years without knowing it existed. I started with a small handful of raw pumpkin seeds most afternoons, the unsalted kind, and a serving of cashews a few times a week, treating it the way I'd treat any habit I actually intend to keep, visible on the counter, not buried in a cabinet where I'd forget about it inside a week. My doctor was clear that this wasn't going to work like flipping a switch, and he was right to warn me. Zinc isn't a drug engineered to block an enzyme completely and overnight the way a prescription might. It's a mineral the body uses in ordinary metabolic processes, and asking it to meaningfully shift enzyme activity in one specific tissue takes sustained, boring consistency, not a burst of enthusiasm that fizzles out after 10 days. He told me plenty of men try something like this for a week, feel nothing, and quit right before it would have actually started showing up. I made myself a promise not to be one of them, mostly because I was tired of quietly enduring something I finally had a real handle on. I built 2 more pieces around that core habit. First, cutting back sharply on the processed, salty snacks that had quietly replaced real food in my afternoons for years, since that inflammatory load works directly against the comfort I was trying to build. Second, a short walk most mornings, since staying physically active is associated with steadier, more comfortable prostate function as men age, and I wanted every piece pulling in the same direction rather than fighting each other. I also paid closer attention to alcohol, cutting back to just an occasional glass of wine instead of the nightly habit I'd fallen into after retirement, since I'd read that heavier drinking is tied to more irritation and inflammation throughout that same tissue, working against the very thing I was trying to calm down. And I made sure I wasn't skipping water during the day just to avoid bathroom trips, which sounds backward, but concentrated, infrequent urination actually seemed to irritate things more than steady, spread-out hydration did. I gave it close to 2 months before I noticed a real, consistent difference in how often I was getting up at night. The first 3 weeks felt like nothing at all, honestly, and I nearly stopped bothering with the seeds more than once, tossing the bag to the back of the pantry before pulling it back out a few days later out of stubbornness more than conviction. My grandson visited for a full week last spring, and we drove 4 hours each way to the coast without a single stop I hadn't planned for scenery instead of urgency. He kept asking if I needed to pull over out of habit from previous trips, and I kept telling him no, genuinely surprised each time I said it. I think about a man named Cletus who wrote to me after hearing this explanation for the first time, 76, retired from 30 years running a hardware store, who told me he'd never once heard the word DHT from any doctor he'd seen, only ever, "It's just your age," repeated back to him appointment after appointment. He said the enzyme explanation was the first time anyone had actually told him what was happening inside his own body, instead of just naming the symptom and moving on. Cletus started keeping a jar of pumpkin seeds by his recliner, the same chair he sits in every evening, so reaching for a handful became automatic instead of something he had to remember to do. He told me his wife noticed before he did, mentioning one night at dinner that he hadn't gotten up once during their movie, something that used to happen without fail, twice a picture. He wrote to me again a few months later, this time about something I hadn't expected him to mention at all. He'd started going back to the Sunday breakfast club he used to run with 3 other retired shop owners, a standing tradition he'd quietly stopped attending 2 years earlier because the diner they met at only had the one bathroom, always occupied, and he'd rather skip breakfast with old friends than sit there anxious the whole time. He said going back felt almost silly to celebrate, a Sunday breakfast, but it wasn't really about the breakfast. It was about not organizing his whole week around a body he didn't trust anymore. If you're taking medication for your prostate, your blood pressure, or your heart, please hear this clearly. Nothing here replaces what your doctor has prescribed, and you should never stop or adjust a medication on your own. Keep getting your regular checkups and keep your doctor in the loop about anything you add to your routine, including something as ordinary as seeds and nuts. What I want you to walk away with is this. The growth you're dealing with isn't some mysterious inevitability with no mechanism behind it. There's a specific enzyme, a specific hormone it produces locally inside the gland, and specific everyday choices that appear to interfere with that process. Once you understand the actual chain of events, you stop feeling like a passenger in your own body. Here's what I settled on: a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. I think about the man I was, treating the pressure and the bathroom trips as simply the price of getting old, never once asking why. And I think about the man I am now, who finally understands the actual mechanism sitting behind what he used to just endure. I didn't get a younger body back. I got an explanation, and an actual handle on the thing I'd spent decades quietly enduring. If a doctor has ever explained something to you in a way that finally made an old symptom make sense, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one myself. And if this kind of plain explanation is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this every week, explained the way I wish someone had explained it to me 30 years ago.